Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. What started as all things related to brain health and wellness has morphed into largely brain injury health and wellness, with occasional other neurological topics. My mission remains the same, to help you on the path to a healthier brain. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Dr. Amy Coopersmith. Dr. Amy is an internationally recognized occupational therapist, educator, researcher, speaker, and children's author who has dedicated more than 30 years to helping youth become confident, capable, and self-determined. Dr. Coopersmith's groundbreaking research and published scholarly work focus on self-determination, the ability to make choices, solve problems, set goals, and believe in yourself. She is the founder of Self-Determined Kids, creator of the Captain Me educational program, and the Self-Determination Strategies Toolkit, and author of the award-winning children's book, I'm Stuck. Through her engaging presentations, practical resources, and passion for empowering youth, parents, educators, and therapists, Dr. Coopersmith is changing the way we think about helping individuals move from dependence to independence. And I'm so glad to have you here today with me. Thank you so much, Dr. Coopersmith.
Such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So my first question to my guests is always kind of what got you to what you're doing now? What led you into this space that you hold?
I think I've always been a giver. It's just part of my personality. And when I became a health and physical education teacher many years ago, I learned about a researcher named Muska Moston, who had a program called the Spectrum of Teaching Styles. And he had done an abundance of research into client-led learning, whether it's a child, adult, doesn't matter the age. When the person themselves leads their learning, it's 1,000 times more effective. I mean, I'm using the number 1,000, but it's just multiple times better than when someone tells you or teaches you directly and lectures. We all know the difference between sitting in a lecture and then being excited and passionate and opening up a book to learn something that we're excited about. So I noticed that from learning from Muska Moston's research, how that worked, and I embedded that into my work as a teacher. So I was a health and phys ed teacher, and I was teaching middle school, which we all know can be a very tough age.
Yes.
And those students were so enthusiastic and passionate and involved in their studies. And I thought, this is interesting. Okay, so we had all kinds of successes. They were written up in newspapers. They won awards, my students, for some of the projects they had done in the community. And then I became an occupational therapist. And I started using the same approach. And I noticed that children were responding very quickly. And I noticed that other people were not using that because we're kind of taught as therapists and teachers that we want to help and we want to teach specific skills and strategies. And so we tend to kind of be very methodical about it because when we think we're helping, and I'm sure there is a lot of help that goes on with this, but when we let the child or the client, doesn't matter the age, lead the process, it's a way better outcome than when we tell someone or help them too much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you say they are leading, can you explain that a little bit more? How does someone lead their own teaching?
Right. So I'm trying to think as I speak about including all age levels, because I usually talk about children, but self-determination is something that affects everyone age 0 to 100. So what that means is leading your own learning means that you pick the goal for yourself. You decide how you're going to reach that goal. So it would be, just to give an example, if somebody wants to learn horseback riding, let's say, and actually, let's leave that out. Somebody says, you're learning horseback riding today, get on the horse. Then obviously they have not picked that. But let's just say they selected that. Now, the client-led learning would be that they do their own little bit of research, find out what's involved, what do they need, make a plan for themselves. How many days a week will they practice? Will they have access to the horse and the stables? And what kind of equipment do they need? So they're going to do all this research on their own with support, obviously, because if they were able to do it all on their own, they wouldn't need teachers and therapists to help them.
Yeah.
But they're the ones. So let's say a client isn't sure what to do. The teacher or the therapist or the parent, whoever is helping that individual, is going to say, let's go over what some of the options are instead of saying, here's the solution. We don't want to do that and say, here's what you do. And 1, 2, 3, these are the steps you need to take. No, what are the 3 steps you think you need to take? Let's take a look at that. And if you're not sure, we'll look at it together. And so you're partnering with that person, because if we tell them what to do, then as soon as we're gone, they won't know what to do anymore. So we want to make sure that they are developing that confidence that when we're gone, they're going to be able to take over and be just fine.
I love that idea. That comes up with some of my patients a lot when we try to figure out what we can do to help them get better. And I guess I do it without even thinking. I ask them, well, what do you need to get to that next level? So my patients are all traumatic brain injury or acquired brain injury patients. So the focus of my show is the traumatic brain injury world as well. So how can we take those thoughts and bring them to a brain injured person?
So I actually did one of my clinical rotations at a brain injury unit. So I remember very clearly, actually, there was one young woman who was very, very pushing back and resistant to anything. And so the key is finding what lights someone's fire, what gets them excited in life, because especially after a brain injury, doesn't matter if it's mild or severe, a person's going to probably feel depressed. I mean, I would. I think most people would have a lot of emotional baggage after that that's kind of weighing them down. So anything that's going to get a person excited and confident again is what we want to aim for. So, we want to design our interventions to include that person's voice. We want that person's voice in everything they do. And once that happens, the person is kind of unstoppable. Obviously, when there's a very severe brain injury, we need to think out of the box and be creative a little bit to help that person find what's meaningful, because they may not be able to do what they were able to do before. So it's different now. But we can help them identify still what are some new ways that they can engage with the world that make them feel good and excited and happy to wake up in the morning.
And as we were preparing for this talk today, you used the term learned helplessness. Can you talk a little bit more about what that learned helplessness might be and why it might be an important thing, especially for those with a brain injury?
Sure. So generally, I would imagine you know this way more than myself. As I said, I did one unit at a brain injury unit, and the rest of my time I've been in public schools. But I did come across a number of young students who had brain injuries. And so learned helplessness in the schools, it's very clear. And at home, it's very clear. When usually there's someone or multiple people who are helping that person, and I put it in quotes because help is not always a good thing. Obviously, we want to help someone who's struggling. But if we help too much, then the person may stop trying themselves because they know that help is on the way. And with children, that's especially dangerous because they're just learning about the world. And so if they think the world is about somebody helping them 24/7, that's their vision of the world. And they can't even imagine doing things on their own, which is a disaster when they turn 18 or 21, and now they really are on their own, and it's a complete habit and routine to depend on somebody else all day long. So we don't want to see that. Now, with adults, it's very easy for this to happen because the people around them are hurting also. They see this loved one or student, whoever it is, I loved my students, I cared about them. And so it took every fiber of my being to stop helping them because I didn't want to see them struggle and suffer. But if we help too much, then that person stops trying because they know help is on the way. And then that leads to all kinds of negative outcomes where the person is waiting for help all the time, not engaging because they're anticipating that someone's going to do something for them. I've seen situations in schools where somebody does everything for them. They take out their books. They actually do the work for them because they think that this is helping. Yes, it helps the teacher with their documentation to say that the child has been exposed to all the topics, but it's not really helping the child because once that person goes away, I'm sure they're not going to retain whatever that teacher did for them. It's not they're not connecting with it. It's not internalized. I
Yeah.
hope that helps answer that question.
Yeah. So it's kind of unintentionally enabling them to stay in that
Exactly.
role.
And I
Yeah.
think most people relate to the term helicopter parenting.
Yeah. Yep.
We all know we've seen that when we see a parent who is, pushing their child like on some of those dance shows on television, and they're just kind of doing everything and dressing them and making their food for them and just doing everything for them. But that's a reality for some people, that this is how their life has changed, that now someone is doing all these things for them. That's fine temporarily, but the same way when you are admitted to a hospital, the first day that you're admitted, they start a discharge plan
Uh-huh.
because they know you're not going to be living in the hospital. You're going to be living at home. So they start looking into who's at home, what happens at home, where does your food come from, how are you managing at home? And that's what we need to also be doing with people who've suffered from any kind of brain injury, because we want to see how they are going to be able to manage on their own, and not just manage, thrive, have a great life. We want them to have a life just like anybody else, where they're going after things that we love, that they love. That should be, just universal for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So then this idea of self-determination, it's one of the big things you've worked on for a long time. Why
Yes.
is that so important with or without a brain injury?
Right. For everyone.
Yeah.
And, some parents have said to me, oh, my child doesn't need to learn about self-determination because they're totally self-determined already. And that may be the case, but it's super important there's a kind of a list of skills that are related to self-determination that you and I probably take for granted. And those children who their parents are saying, oh, they're so self-determined, they've already got a lot of those skills. So some of those skills are problem solving, choice making, decision making, goal setting, tracking your own progress through self-monitoring, things like that. These are all skills related to self-determination. And this has been researched by thousands of researchers around the world. And every single research study, almost across the board, there's occasional glitches here or there where I'm not sure why, but for the most part, like 99% of them show that when an individual has these skills, their life is so much better than the individuals who don't possess those skills. So we want to try and expose individuals to these options. And I was mentioning before that I had worked at a brain injury unit, and there was a young woman who had, I think she was around 19, 20 years old. She had gotten drunk, drove her car into a wall, had a brain injury, and now she was very depressed. She didn't want to do anything. So I knew, based on talking to her family and trying to pull information out of her when I could, that she loved rock and roll. So I designed a game for her that had all rock stars and rock and roll in it, which was all about rock stars who had had a disability, rock stars who overcame something, and letting her see that she's not alone. And she started, I'm not going to say she suddenly became a cheerleader and started jumping up and down, but she engaged. She started participating in the sessions. And that's what we want to see. We want to see people participating in life. And so if we can give them a way through self-determination, through these skills, to have a better life and get more involved in the things that matter to them. Now, one of the easiest ways to start that, so easy, is choice making. I call it kind of the entryway to self-determination. When someone is really struggling and we want to try and let them take charge of something, let them make a choice. And it can be something simple in the beginning. Just, what would you like to drink with your lunch today? Juice or milk, whatever the choice is. Let them make a choice. And then we build those choices and make them more complex. As once they're able to do the simple choices, we might say, what would you like to work on? Here are some of the things that either your doctor, your family said that they want you to work on. But what do you want to work on? Or if you like all the things that they suggested, what do you want to work on first? What's your choice? And let them see that they have a voice. And sometimes someone who's had a brain injury may not even realize they have a voice anymore. They just think, forget it. the rest of my life, somebody's going to make all these decisions for me. And we don't want that to happen. So let's give them some choices and let them know that their voice matters.
Yeah, as you were describing a lot of those different self-determination skills, choice included in that, it made me think of all of the executive functions in our brain. All those things where we have to make decisions, we have to think about consequences of things, and all of those can be affected if somebody especially has a frontal lobe injury to their brain, which happens very, very commonly. And some of those individuals might not be able to make those simple decisions. So it's not even a matter all the time of the fact that they don't want to or they don't think they can. Sometimes they literally can't. And I can say that from personal experience after having my own injury. There was a time when I couldn't decide what I wanted to eat. I have all this food in my kitchen and I couldn't figure out what is it that I wanted to eat. So where would you start with somebody if you're trying to help them get to that point where they can make those decisions and have the confidence to make those decisions?
If, obviously, I mean, I've worked with children who were having seizures and in a coma or in a near vegetative state during the day at school. So, I mean, they were sleeping during the day. When someone is in that extreme of a state of awareness,
Yeah.
or lack of awareness, there might not be that much that's possible. But when we get to a point where there is some communication possible, if, I'm even talking about eye blinking, because one of my heroes is somebody named Ruth Sinkowitz Mercer, who she is deceased. She passed away in the late 1990s, but she was in an institution because it was assumed that she had no brain function whatsoever. And she had been born as a typical infant and then experienced encephalitis. And when she had that encephalitis, she lost many of her skills and then didn't regain them for a very long time. And so she was non-speaking. She was in an institution. She was lying in a bed for nearly 20 years. And all they did was change her position and feed her and clean her. That was it. When someone heard her laugh at a joke, someone across the hall was telling a joke and she laughed, they went to the administration and said, she's got brain activity. We have to help her communicate. She did eye gaze after they had a physical therapist who came in and a chart where she did eye gaze and learned how to do some very, very basic communication skills. And when that happened, her life changed. Short story, she became a best-selling New York Times author, 2 books, got married to someone who lived in the institution where she was, and they moved out with supports in place. She appeared on television with Ellen DeGeneres and all kinds of shows because she wanted to spread the word that a brain injury doesn't mean forever. And that was her message. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to be able to speak with you today, because I know that there are so many people who are kind of locked inside because no one is giving them that opportunity to share their ideas. So yes, there are going to be some people where it's going to be either impossible or it's going to seem impossible. But as the person's helper, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a therapist, just someone who cares about that person, a friend, we want to give them maximum opportunities to express those ideas. So, for those 20 years, nobody was giving her an opportunity, but finally someone did. And, not everyone is going to have the brilliance that she had writing those books and everything, but even just the simplest little change, whether it's helping to put on your clothes, whether it's helping to make a sandwich. Something so simple can be so meaningful for someone who's just been lying there and not being given these chances. So it won't be possible for everybody, but my belief is let's give the maximum opportunity for everyone to have that chance to express what matters to them.
Yeah, so I was going to ask the next question. It would be, what are some practical tips that those family and caregivers can do? You gave a couple there. Is there anything else that people can do just to get started giving that person that opportunity?
Sure. So first of all, with a brain injury, you have a history. So we may know what the person was interested in before, okay? And that can be a key. So when I worked at the head trauma unit, there was a gentleman there. He was a PhD, former superintendent of a school district, and he had had a stroke. And he looked vegetative. He was not really able to communicate. And, he was probably in his 70s, I guess, maybe something like that. And I used to go and talk to him, and I would play music for him. And then one day I asked his family what were his interests. They said he loved music. He loved opera. I put on Old Man River, the song, and he sang the entire song, belting it out. We were in the middle of a huge exercise room, and nobody had ever heard him speak before. And they all came running over with their mouths hanging open. And he had a baritone voice. He sounded like an opera singer. And no one had any clue that he had this skill. And so using that history can be a key to unlocking what's important for a person. Will it always work? Not 24/7, not 100% of the time, but you never know when including somebody's history of what they were interested in. Maybe they had some favorite songs from their youth. Maybe they used to love art, something that might spark something exciting within them. I mentioned about choices. Sometimes having the choices physically, when you just use the words and you say, do you want a peanut butter sandwich or a tuna fish sandwich? That might not be enough. Maybe a picture, or maybe the actual putting it in front of the person. They might respond or eye gaze towards something, and that can indicate where their interest level is. So giving them not just word opportunities, saying, do you want to go outside or do you want to watch TV? Instead, take them. Do you want to stay here? Or let's take a look over here. Which would you like now? And they might not be able to answer verbally, but they might give some indications. So that's a good way to have choices. Another thing is to use bingo markers, eye gaze, or, any other kind of physical indication, so that you can say to a person, this is what they said to Ruth Sinkowitz Mercer, raise your eyes when you want to say yes. So she couldn't move anything. She was completely physically locked in, but she was able to raise her eyes. And that was what eventually, when she was able to do the eye gaze, and that was how she wrote her whole book. She would gaze at letters, and that's how she spelled everything out. So, eye gaze can be a way to communicate. We need to start thinking outside the box in terms of ways to communicate with people, and accepting that that's valid. There's nothing wrong with communicating in different ways. So those are a few ideas. There's so many. And so what I was mentioning about the either using a bingo marker or eye gaze, whatever it might be, by doing that, we are engaging the person in an actual activity that they can do to communicate. So I hope, and then what they can do is, what I used to do is have a chart on the wall, and they could go over, and let's say I'd be talking with them about, okay, we're going to do some arm exercises today, because we want to make sure our arms and our hands are nice and strong for some of the tasks we need to do every day. So then they would go over and check off that they did their exercises today, because it's their exercises, not mine. So let them take charge of that. And what I used to do is, when it was time to do an activity, I would put a board in front of the person and have that, if they're able to write or check something off, let's say, what should we do first today? You tell me. And then either they're going to, like I said, an eye gaze, check mark, writing it down, drawing a picture, any of those things are acceptable ways of saying what they want to start with today.
So going back onto your experience with pediatrics, are there different things that you would do with different ages of patients?
For sure. Well, one of the things that I'm so excited about is that I've been working on a puppet theater experience. First of all, about 6 years ago, I created Captain Me, which is a puppet-based problem-solving program. So, but it's lots of fun. It has music and silly puppets, and, it's just, it's very much a la Sesame Street, and there's songs in it, and the children can sing along with the songs. And it's always, every sketch is about the puppet is a little blue puppet boy who has spina bifida, and he goes through his day facing different challenges. And in every one, he doesn't know what to do. He sits there trying to figure things out, doesn't know what to do, and then he learns to take time to think. And this is a huge thing. We always are in a rush in this society, and we want, when someone can't do something, we rush in to help them because, oh, God forbid they should have to wait 30 or 60 seconds So we want to try and help them right away, you know. And same thing when we ask a question, if the person doesn't answer right away, we get all worried about it. Give them time to think. And that's what happens in the videos is we say, take time to think. And the character thinks and ponders what could be a good solution for whatever he's going through. And then everybody sings a song about it. And then, of course, he makes his decision of what he's going to do. But it's his decision, nobody else's. So that's a puppet-based program for little ones. Because what I noticed is that there was no self-determination education going on for toddlers through, I would say, maybe age 6 or 7. Most of the self-determination education that happens is like maybe age 8 or 9 up through adulthood. So we all know that we form habits at a very young age. So if we've gotten into a habit of letting everybody else do everything for us by age 7 or 8, well, it's kind of hard to change at that point. So, better that we should get in at a young age and say, listen, it's your life. You're in charge. Let's figure out how you can make things happen for yourself that make you happy. So that's for the little ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Then as we get older, I have something called the Self-Determination Strategies Toolkit. Sorry, I'm just going to grab it right here. So this is for the adults that work with, let's say, preteens all the way through adulthood. And I'll just show you how. It's a very simple book. It has a little instruction page that says how to use it. And there are 10 strategies. And these are strategies that either the therapist, the teacher, the parent, whoever's with that individual is going to use these strategies, and it's a menu. So there are many programs out there that tell you step 1, step 2, step 3, here's what you do. There's something called the Co-op, and it's a fabulous program. Another one called the Self-Determined Learning Model of Instruction. They're fabulous programs, but we don't always operate in a world where we can do 1, 2, 3, 4. We might not have an hour with a person. So this is a menu, and you just pick a strategy that you think will make sense for that individual. So these include self-talk. We want the person to be talking about the steps they're taking to get something done. Obviously, if they can't speak, it would be handled differently. Time to think. We want to give them plenty of time to think. No rushing necessary. The world is much too rush. So we want to give everyone. I don't like being rushed when somebody's saying, hurry up, hurry up. No, we never function well like that. So we want to take a breath and let people know it's fine to take your time. We want to ask questions of the person, teach problem solving, employ video-based learning, which I can talk about. It's kind of a form of role play, and we can also use role play with puppets or videos, goal setting, self-monitoring, engaging in decision-making, and singing empowering songs. So I can talk for a minute about the video-based learning and role play because it's very powerful. Nobody likes it when you go in and you say, do you have a problem? I can see you're upset today. Something like that. That's very upsetting. Or I heard you were having problems in the lunchroom. Or I heard you had problems at work the other day. Everybody, when that happens, you feel very much on the defensive. But if you say, this puppet is having a problem, or you show a video where the individual in the video is having a problem, now we're talking about a third person. And it's so much less upsetting and less threatening to an individual. And so then sometimes they can identify the problem in someone else and come up with strategies and then internalize that for themselves. So that's what the video-based learning is about. And then video-based learning for an adult might be, I was thinking about, there's a video of Homer Simpson who has a problem with alcoholism. And, every once in a while, these kind of trendy shows will have a meaningful episode about something. And so when people see that, they can relate to it in a different way than if somebody just comes up to them and says, I see you're drinking too much. But they can see that Homer Simpson is drinking too much and identify what the problem is and what should be done about it. And then that can, carry over to their own life. So in this book, the way I have it structured is that there's a little worksheet that goes with each topic. But, this is something that can easily be done. You don't need the book necessarily. You can use the strategies just as they are and engage the person. I also mentioned before about songs. We all relate to music. Sometimes we might have music from our past that we enjoy, and that's very powerful. especially if someone's had an injury and then they hear a song from before their injury, it can wake things up in them and get them excited. So we want to find everything that's going to light that fire in that individual. And sometimes music can be the key.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the speaker that you or not the speaker. I had a speaker that made me think about what you were talking about when you mentioned the person that was the opera singer and being able to belt out those words being the singer. Our speech center and our music center are actually two different centers in our brain, but they're very close to each other. But that can help us learn to speak again. It can help us learn to get those words out again. I actually saw it in practice at a conference that I went to years ago, an international stroke conference. One of the keynote speakers was someone who had had a brain injury, had a stroke, and couldn't speak very well. They had aphasia, but they could sing. So they sang this beautiful opera song after being up on stage and struggling over their words, and showing how that speech center still worked and that speech can still be a big part of who they are, and kind of getting back to that being able to speak again, because you can turn anything into a song. As I'm cleaning my house, I will sometimes turn things into a song, and sometimes my kids are creative enough and they'll join in and add a whole nother chapter to the song. But as we're going through that can be a really creative and a really useful way to get somebody to be able to get their thoughts out again, is using that music. So I love that you do that.
Right. And what I go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning thinking, what else can I do? What
Yeah.
else? I'm always thinking of new ways. And that's what other people, when you have a person you care about who has a brain injury, that's the mindset to think, what else can I do to make, and when I say, what else can I do? I don't mean to help. What else can I do to let that person have a voice? That's what what else can I do? So what else can I do to give them an opportunity to express themselves? Can I put some choices in front of them? Instead of saying, here's breakfast, say we've got muffins, toast, and, eggs. What would you like? Tell me your voice. Tell me your preferences. Because the more the person is able to do that, the more they're going to get back to what really matters to them inside.
What are some of your other things that you love working on, if there's something else that we haven't talked about yet today?
So there are two things that I just always like to talk about. One is presuming competence, and the other is partnering with the person who is going through their experience. So presuming competence, that's also something that I learned when I was studying to be a teacher. And there was a famous study that was done, I don't know how many years ago, many, many years ago, and they called it the Pygmalion effect done. And the Pygmalion effect, if you've ever seen My Fair Lady, it was about a woman who nobody believed that she could change, and she proved everybody wrong. So the idea is that if you don't believe somebody is capable of change, they won't. But if you believe that they're capable of change, they will. And when I say that so emphatically, of course it's not 100%. It's never, but it's way different in terms of the percentages. And in the study, they picked two separate classrooms of children that were pretty much equivalent. And they told one teacher, these are students who are really struggling. Don't expect much from them. And then they told the other teacher, these are gifted students and they should be able to, change the world. And so they had these two, but all the kids were matched for equal IQ, equal ability levels. And what do you think happened? The kids who were in the class with the low expectations failed. And the kids who were in with the high expectations ended up, A+ students, achieving everything. And so the idea is, with the Pygmalion effect, that if we believe in a person, whether it's a child, an adult, doesn't matter, you believe in that person, they are going to reach heights that are unexpected. Okay, so that's what we want to aim for. So that's presuming competence. We want to assume that everyone who we come in contact with, everyone we're talking with, every client we have, that they've got something on the ball and that we can learn from them, and that they have a message, they have a voice, they have something to share with the world, they have skills that not everybody else has. And so we want to honor that in all these different people. Then the other thing was about partnering, is that there's a different way of looking at our work. I'm a therapist. Of course, I was a teacher before, so it's a different role. But if I had looked at my role as that I'm going to give them all my knowledge, That's kind of spoon feeding and saying, here's some information and you need to learn this. Or I'm partnering with them and I'm saying, what do you want to learn? What's interesting to you? Let's think about that. And so when I taught health classes, I gave them opportunities to design their own assignments, independent study. They were middle school. So, and they were not, they had for the most part, did not have brain injuries, but
Yeah.
I'm just giving this as an example. So they were children who came from a very impoverished neighborhood and had a lot of struggles. So everybody was very surprised because they came up with these gorgeous assignments. And I mean, like spectacular. And so I had them designing anti-smoking artwork. And I said, you can pick anything you want to do, whatever you think makes sense. Think about someone in your life who might have struggled because of tobacco use, they got sick or whatever, and make some artwork that's anti-tobacco. Well, it was so beautiful that I said, I can't put this in a drawer, or I can't send it home with them, and then their parents are going to put it in garbage or put it in a cabinet somewhere. So I went to the local pizzeria and said, can I hang these on the wall? And they saw them and they said, of course, so I put it all over the walls. And wouldn't you know it, a newspaper reporter contacted the school and said they wanted to come do a story. So they did a front page story. All my kids were covered in the newspaper. And then I took the rest because I couldn't put I had 800 students. So,
Oh my gosh.
health, everybody in the school gets health class. So, there were so many. So I probably posted maybe 50 or 100 and I took the whole rest, the stack, put it in a giant box and sent it to the White House. And I said, let's just see what happens. And I put a little letter, we've been doing lessons on tobacco use and the dangers. And so probably about 6 months later, I got a phone call because in those days there was no internet. We're talking about the early 90s or mid 1990s. And so I get a phone call that Vice President Al Gore was coming into town and he wanted to meet my students because the reason for his trip to New York City was to talk with the tobacco companies about changing the way they were promoting to youth. And so my kids got to meet the vice president. And so I look at that as it was a long journey, but it started with them being able to express what mattered to them. And that's self-determination. So it's very powerful. I carried it through all these 30 years of my professional life. And now I'm trying to teach others so that people can benefit from, it's not just my research. I've done quite a few research articles and textbooks now that because I wanted to do the research. It's not enough to just say, this is great. We know it's great, but what does the research say? So the research is very powerful. And so if I can reach people, whether it's one person or 1,000 people, and that can change their life for the better, then I'm happy. I've done what I wanted.
That's amazing. What an amazing experience. And to teach the kids that something that they did, that they created, made such an impact on somebody at the White House even. That's remarkable. That's really cool.
So, and this is what inspires me as I go forward, because sometimes I'll get to a point where there's a lull and I say, the interest seems to have waned and I don't know if, and then all of a sudden something happens again and it's back in the forefront. And, I say, okay, I'm going to keep going as long as there's interest there. I have a book signing for my children's book, which is called I'm Stuck. And I have a book signing at Barnes & Noble on August 1st. I just published the book in March of this year. And so again, now I'm going to have a new audience, this time parents and the children, because usually I'm talking to teachers and therapists. Now I'll be talking directly with parents, and I'm really excited about that.
Very cool. Very cool. What other things do you have coming up that you want to share with our listeners?
So, well, I mentioned about the book. We have live in-person puppet shows. I'm not sure if, I guess this will be visible. Can you see that clearly?
Yeah. Yep.
So the Captain Me puppet show is, this is the little blue puppet named Cappy, and I will be in the puppet show. If you've ever seen Sesame Street, there's usually a person sitting on the stoop, a human who's interacting with the puppets. And so that's going to be me, and I'll be interacting with several puppets who are enacting a show about self-determination. But it's for very young children. So it's about inspiring them to realize that they have a voice and that they can decide certain things on their own. Now, obviously, they can't decide everything. They can't say, I'm self-determined, so I'm not going to bed tonight.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a choice. But we can give them the appropriate choices, and we can even explain that to young children, that there are going to be certain choices that you're not allowed to make. You can't eat 10 pieces of cake because that will give you a tummy ache. But there are certain choices that you can make, and here they are. Try thinking about these different choices. And so that's what this puppet show is about. And it's interactive, so I work with the children in the audience to get them involved, and then the puppets come out and they talk about their struggles. There's a little girl in the show, a girl puppet who has autism, and she's afraid that children are going to make fun of her. And so it's all about, how to handle these situations and feel good about yourself and to realize that you're not alone.
Very cool. Very cool. How can people find you if they want to learn more about these different events and activities that you have going on?
So I have a website, Self-Determined Kids, and it's selfdeterminedkids.com.
Yep.
And that's easy to find me there. And I have an email associated with that, info@selfdeterminedkids.com. And then I also have, Facebook. And if you put my name in Dr. Amy Coopersmith and self-determination, you'll see everything there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, my book, I'm Stuck, which is about this little puppet who is really stuck trying to make a decision and can't figure out what to do. So those are very easy ways to find me.
Very cool. Very cool. I will include all of those all of those links in the show notes also, so people can find you and they don't have to worry about writing it down if they're listening while they're driving, all of that fun stuff. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with our listeners as we wrap up today?
Just that don't be afraid to try little steps, okay? You don't have to do all these things that I'm talking about here. Just ask a child a question. That's it. Ask them a question. That's it. Or ask an individual with a brain injury a question. An open-ended question, an opinion question. That's the simplest thing you can do. When somebody is struggling, let them struggle for a minute and say, I'm not going to help you yet because I bet you have an idea how to fix this. I have confidence in you. And when you say something like that, that's a very powerful message. So those are the types of things that we can incorporate into our lives on a day-to-day basis. And as I said, I wake up and go to sleep thinking about what else can I do? And this is what you can do. You know that person you care about, and you can start to think, what's something I can build into our lives that's going to help make a difference for them? And when I say help make a difference, not you doing it, them doing it. So that's the key.
I love that. Great words to end on. Thank you so much, Dr. Coopersmith.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it so that others can benefit. Please also consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to catch the latest info and get links on all of the social medias there. See you next time.